Bible page cost her nothing. It gave him everything. Rafael Vega was 32 years old, worth $49 million, and completely hollow inside a penthouse that looked out over all of Atlanta. He had not slept properly in 3 days. Not because of the markets, not because of the board, because of a piece of paper. A single torn page from a child's Bible, folded into quarters so many times the creases had become permanent, the ink fading at the corners, the edges worn as soft as cloth from 2 decades of handling. He kept it inside a small glass case on his nightstand. Every morning he looked at it before he looked at anything else. Every night it was the last thing he saw before he closed his eyes. He had been carrying it for 22 years. The girl who gave it to him was 9 years old. He was 10. He had been starving. She had pressed that page through the chain-link fence of a church in southwest Atlanta and told him in an accent that was warm and certain and completely without hesitation that God had not forgotten him. He had not forgotten her either. Not for a single day in 22 years. Rafael Vega's mornings looked nothing like his childhood. The espresso machine in his kitchen cost more than his mother had earned in a full year of cleaning office buildings. His closet held 40 suits, all tailored, all pressed. His bathroom had heated floors. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Buckhead penthouse and watched the Atlanta skyline rise through the morning fog, and he felt absolutely nothing. Not pride, not gratitude, not peace. Just the familiar hollow weight of the search that had consumed the last 5 years of his life. His assistant Marco had already sent 4 messages before 6 in the morning. The West Side acquisition closed. 11 million. The Harper project needs your signature. Board meeting at 9. He answered each one in 2 words or fewer and walked away from his phone. He went to his home office, unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, and lifted out the glass case. The Bible page inside was from the book of Psalms, chapter 34. She had circled a single verse before she pushed it through the fence. He had memorized it within the first week. He could still see her handwriting in the margin, careful and round the way a child writes when they are trying to be taken seriously. She had written his name next to the verse. Just his name, Rafael, in like she was making sure the promise applied specifically to him. The board meeting was exactly what Rafael expected. Applause, handshakes, congratulations on another successful quarter. He stood at the head of the table and performed the version of himself that the room required, confident, sharp, decisive. His business partner, Carter Webb, watched him from the far end of the table with the look he always wore when he knew something was wrong. After the room cleared, Carter pulled the door shut behind the last executive and turned around. "You were somewhere else in there." "I was here the whole time." "Physically, yes." Carter sat on the edge of the conference table. "Rafael, this is the 4th meeting in a row where I've watched you go through the motions. Something is off." "I'm fine." That word again. Carter shook his head. "Watch the Southwest Atlanta properties. You've bought 6 buildings in 18 months in a neighborhood that won't produce returns for years. I know the numbers. Then explain the strategy to me, because I've run every model and none of them make sense as pure investment." Rafael was quiet for a long moment. Carter had been his friend for 11 years, longer than any investor, longer than any employee. He almost told him. Instead, he said, "I have my reasons." Carter studied him the way people study a building they suspect has a crack in the foundation. "Is this about the girl?" Rafael's jaw tightened. "Drop it." "Rafael." "Drop it, Carter." Carter held his hands up slowly. "I'm just saying, whatever this is, it's costing you more than money. I know exactly what it's costing me." That was the end of the conversation. But Carter was right. It was costing him everything except the one thing he actually wanted. Rafael sat alone in his office that afternoon and opened the file he had looked at so many times the pages were practically memorized. 5 years, 3 private investigators. The most recent firm had sent their final report 8 months ago. "We have exhausted all available leads." Adaeze Okonkwo is not an uncommon name within Nigerian-American communities in the southeastern United States. The family left their southwest Atlanta address sometime around 2009 with no forwarding information. "We found no current records matching your description in Fulton County." He closed the file and pulled up the map on his screen. 6 red pins in southwest Atlanta, all within 2 miles of Greater Calvary Baptist Church on Delmar Avenue. That church, that fence. At that morning in February when he was 10 years old and had not eaten in 4 days. If Adaeze was still in Atlanta, she was in that community. He knew it the way he knew certain things about markets, not from data alone, but from something underneath the data. She was the kind of person who stayed, who served, who planted herself where she was needed and did not leave. So he had bought buildings. He had created reasons to be present in that neighborhood. He had funded renovation projects, attended zoning meetings, hired locally, all of it legitimate, all of it genuinely good work, and all of it quietly arranged so that he would be visible, present, findable, in case she was looking to. His phone buzzed, a calendar reminder. Community development meeting tonight. Greater Calvary Baptist Church Fellowship Hall, 7 o'clock. And he had been sending Marco to these meetings for months. Something made him type a reply to his own calendar, attending personally. He sat back and looked at the message. He did not know why tonight felt different. He just knew it did. The memories came the way they always came, uninvited, complete, vivid as the day they formed. He was 10 years old. It was February in Atlanta, which meant it was cold in a way that surprised people who thought the South was always warm. He had been on his own for 11 days. His mother had been taken by ICE agents on a Tuesday morning while he was at school. He came home to an empty apartment and a neighbor who would not open her door. The school found out eventually, called family services, but the placement moved fast and fell apart faster. The foster family said he was too withdrawn or too difficult. What they meant was he did not speak much English yet, and he cried at night, and they did not have patience for either. He slipped through. 11 days on the streets of southwest Atlanta, sleeping in a doorway behind a laundromat, eating whatever he could find, wearing the same jacket his mother had bought him for Christmas. By day 11, he could not walk a straight line. He found Greater Calvary Baptist Church because he could hear singing from the street. He sat against the chain-link fence that ran along the side of the building where the children had their Sunday school outdoor time, and he put his back against the cold metal and closed his eyes. A woman found him there, a church woman in her 50s with a lanyard and a clipboard. She looked at him and said, "You cannot sit here. This is private property." She said it without cruelty, but also without hesitation, and she walked away. He tried to stand up and could not. That was when he heard the voice. Adaeze Okonkwo was 9 years old and had been raised in a household where Sundays were sacred and generosity was not optional. Her parents had come from Enugu State in Nigeria 8 years earlier, her father to study engineering, her mother to be with her father, and both of them to build something permanent in a country that did not make permanence easy. They lived in a modest house 3 streets from Greater Calvary, attended every Sunday, volunteered every other Saturday. Her grandmother, Mama Ngozi, had come from Nigeria the previous year and had taken over the kitchen and a significant portion of the family's spiritual direction. Mama Ngozi said 2 things constantly. God sees everything and we share what we have. Adaeze had absorbed both completely. That February Sunday during the children's outdoor fellowship hour, Adaeze was standing near the fence with her Bible when she saw the boy. Her friend Chisholm pulled her arm. "Come, they are starting the memory verse competition." But Adaeze did not move. The boy on the other side of the fence was sitting with his back against the chain link, his head fallen to one side, his jacket far too thin, his face the color of someone who had been cold for a very long time. She could see his hands shaking from where she stood. Chisholm looked. "That boy has been there since this morning. Someone said he sleeps here." Adaeze looked at her friend. "He is hungry." "How do you know?" "Because I know what hungry looks like." Adaeze's family had never been wealthy. And there had been years, early years, when her parents worked double shifts and the pantry was nearly empty by Thursday. Mama Ngozi had taught her the face hunger made on a person. She was looking at that face right now. Adaeze walked to the fence. The boy heard her coming and opened his eyes, and they were dark and frightened and completely exhausted. She stopped about a foot away from the chain link and looked at him directly. She was 9 years old and entirely unafraid. "Hi, my name is Adaeze." He stared at her. His lips were cracked. His eyes moved to her Bible, then back to her face. She had brought her lunch to church that day because the family was going to her aunt's house after service, and they were eating there. A meat pie her mother had made, an orange, a small container of jollof rice still warm from the morning. She held the lunch bag out toward the fence. "Take it." He did not move. She pushed it further. "It is okay. You need it more." He reached through the chain link with shaking hands and took the bag. He opened it and looked inside, and then looked up at her with an expression she would think about for the rest of her life. He ate without stopping. She watched him eat everything. The rice first, then the meat pie, then the orange. When he finished, he held the empty containers and did not speak. She spoke for him. "What is your name?" He swallowed. "Rafael." "Are you sleeping outside, Rafael?" He nodded. She looked at him for a long moment. She opened her Bible. It was her own, given to her by Mama Ngozi, with her name written inside the cover in her grandmother's handwriting. She turned to Psalm 34 and read verse 18 to herself. She took the page between her fingers and carefully, deliberately, tore it from the binding. Her Sunday school teacher would have been horrified. She did not care. She folded the page into quarters and pushed it through the fence. He took it. She said, "That verse is for you. It means God has not forgotten you, even when it feels like everyone else has." He unfolded the page and looked at the circled verse, even though she was not sure he could read English yet. She took a pen from her coat pocket, and in the margin beside the verse, she wrote his name, Rafael, so that the promise would be specifically his. The bell rang for the memory verse competition. Adaeze looked at the church door, then back at Rafael. "I will bring you food tomorrow." He looked up. "You will come back?" "I said I would." She held his gaze for one more second, then walked toward the church door. She turned around twice. Rafael blinked. The memory released him. He looked at the clock on his office wall. 6:41. The meeting started at 7. He stood up, put on his jacket, and went to the nightstand in his bedroom. He looked at the glass case for a long moment. Then he picked up his keys and walked out the door. He did not know what was waiting for him at Greater Calvary Baptist Church Fellowship Hall. He only knew that something had shifted, the way air shifts before a storm, and he had learned over 22 years to pay attention to that feeling. Rafael arrived at the Fellowship Hall at 6:58. The building was old but clean, the kind of old that came from being loved rather than neglected. Folding chairs arranged in rows, a podium at the front, on hand-lettered signs on the walls announcing food pantry hours and youth tutoring schedules. About 60 people were already seated. Families, elders, young professionals, community organizers. Rafael's suit cost more than the monthly budget of the room he was standing in, and he was aware of this. A woman at the sign-in table looked up at him with the careful expression people reserve for developers at community meetings. Rafael Vega. Vega Capital. Yes. She checked his name off a list. "You're actually here yourself." "I am." She handed him a name tag. "Most developers send their lawyers." "I'm not most developers." She looked at him for a moment longer than was polite, then gestured toward the seats. "The back row, I'd guess." He sat in the third row. A man in his 60s in a pastor's collar stood at the podium. Pastor Leonard Briggs, where, according to the printed agenda Rafael had been handed at the door. "Good evening. I am Pastor Leonard Briggs, Board President of the Southwest Atlanta Community Coalition. Tonight we discuss the Vega Capital Development proposal for this quarter." He paused and looked at the room. "We have heard promises before, many of them. What we have not always seen is follow-through. So tonight we ask real questions and we expect real answers." "Mr. Vega." Rafael stood and walked to the front. He had given 100 presentations in rooms far more impressive than this one. None of them had mattered as much. He pulled up his slides on the portable screen. Architectural renderings, unit counts, income projections. "Good evening. My name is Rafael Vega. I grew up not far from this neighborhood." That got the room's attention the way he knew it would, and not because he was performing, but because it was true. The proposal is for mixed-income housing. 60% of units reserved for current residents at current rental rates. Full renovation of this fellowship hall and the adjacent community kitchen, funded entirely by Vega Capital. Job training partnerships with 6 Atlanta employers who have committed to hiring locally. A permanent endowment to fund youth programming for 10 years, regardless of what happens with the development itself. Hands went up immediately. an older man in the second row. Mr. Vega, affordable to whom? We have heard that word before and watched it mean $200 more than we currently pay. The units will be priced at 30% of area median income for qualifying residents. We are working directly with the Fulton County Housing Authority to verify eligibility and protect existing tenants. More hands. A young woman near the back. What happens to the people who can't qualify? We are partnering with 2 legal aid organizations to help residents navigate qualification. No displacement without equivalent housing offered first. That is in the contract. Pastor Briggs pointed toward the middle section of the room. The woman in the 4th row who has been waiting with her hand up for 3 minutes. A voice rose from the middle of the room, strong, clear, entirely unintimidated. Mr. Vega, I work with the youth outreach program at this church. I have watched 4 developments come into this corridor in 8 years. Every single one promised affordability. Every single one gentrified existing residents out within 5 years. What specifically makes your proposal different from the last 4? Rafael turned toward the voice, and the world stopped. She was in her early 30s, natural hair, professional blazer, a notepad in her hands. She was looking directly at him with the expression of someone who had been disappointed enough times to have stopped giving grace without evidence. She had not changed the way people changed so much as she had grown into herself, fuller, more certain, more present. But the eyes were the same. The way she held her chin was the same. The directness was exactly the same. He gripped the edge of the podium. His mouth went dry. He found his voice from somewhere below the shock. You are right to demand specifics. He heard himself speaking as if from a distance. The contract language is available for public review tonight. Every affordability commitment has a 10-year legal enforcement clause, not a promise, a clause with financial penalties if violated. He paused. May I ask your name? A ripple of curiosity moved through the room at the question. She looked slightly surprised by it. Adaeze Okonkwo. I'm the Youth Services Coordinator here at Greater Calvary. The room tilted. His hands were trembling against the podium. He was 32 years old, worth $49 million, and he could not feel his legs. 22 years of searching, 3 investigators, 6 buildings bought in a 2-mile radius, hoping proximity would eventually produce her. And she was here. She had been here. She was looking at him with no recognition at all because he had been a starving 10-year-old boy the last time she saw him, and he now stood 6 feet tall in a tailored suit, and she had no reason to see him in this person. He steadied himself. Ms. Okonkwo, you mentioned you work with youth. The youth programming endowment I mentioned, I would like to discuss the structure of that directly with the youth services team. Can you tell me, did you grow up attending this church? She looked puzzled by the question. Yes, my family has attended Greater Calvary for over 20 years. Raphael's throat tightened. And when you were a child, did you ever help with outreach at the side fence, along the south property line? The room had gone quiet in a different way now. Adaeze lowered her notepad slowly. Yes. Why are you asking me this? Do you remember, about 22 years ago, a boy who used to sit outside that fence? A Latino boy, 10 years old? Adaeze Okonkwo went completely still. Her notepad fell to her side. The pen she was holding dropped to the floor and no one picked it up. The room disappeared. Her mind went back to a February morning that she had thought about at some point nearly every day since it happened. Her voice came out very quiet. What did you say? Raphael's voice was barely above steady. You gave him food every day for months. You gave him a Bible page. You wrote his name in the margin. Adaze's hand came up slowly and covered her mouth. Her eyes filled immediately, not gradually, just filled, the way eyes fill when something that has been held in reserve for a very long time suddenly finds a release. She whispered, Raphael? The room erupted in sound. And Pastor Briggs stood. People turned to each other, but Raphael and Adaeze were not in the room anymore. Not really. He nodded. Adaeze's breath left her in a single sound that was not quite a word. She took 2 steps toward the front of the room and stopped. 22 years. It's me. I came back. I told you I would come back. Adaeze pressed both hands over her heart. She was shaking. I looked for you. After you left, I went back to that fence every day for 2 weeks. He was around the podium now, walking toward her, and the 60 people in that room were watching something they would describe to their families for years. I have been looking for you for 5 years, Rafael said. His voice broke on the last word. I bought those buildings looking for you. Pastor Briggs cleared his throat. Let us take a short recess. People stood, whispered. Some cried without knowing exactly why. Rafael and Adaeze stood in the middle of the fellowship hall and looked at each other, and neither of them spoke for a long moment because there was too much to say and no way to choose which part came first. Pastor Briggs offered his office. They sat across from each other at a small desk covered in church bulletins and donation records, and Adaeze looked at Rafael Vega the way you look at something you thought was gone forever that has materialized in front of you without warning. I cannot believe it is you, she said. Her voice was still not entirely steady. You grew up. You are so different. You're the same, Rafael said. Exactly the same. She shook her head. I am very different. But the eyes. He leaned forward slightly. The eyes are exactly the same as they were through that fence. Adaeze looked down at her hands. Tell me what happened to you. After you left the fence, he told her. The placement that fell apart, the group home, the second family that was better, the school counselor who refused to let him fail, the community college scholarship, the entry-level position at a real estate firm where he worked every hour they would give him, the slow climb, the company he started at 26, the growth that surprised even him. I thought about that page every single day, he said. He pulled out his keychain. Attached to it was a small laminated card. She leaned forward and read it. It was a photocopy of Psalm 34, verse 18. She looked up. I carry the original in a glass case on my nightstand, he said. I have never damaged it. I have never lost it. I have handled it carefully for 22 years. Adaeze pressed her lips together. She reached into the collar of her blazer and drew out a thin chain. On it hung a small medal, the kind given at a child's baptism. Threaded through the same chain was a small folded square of paper. She held it out to him. He looked at it without touching it. What is that? The first note you ever gave me, she said. He stared. The day you could finally write enough English to form a sentence, you pushed a piece of paper through the fence. It said, thank you for seeing me. I kept it. Rafael could not speak. You kept it for 22 years. She looked at him steadily. You kept my Bible page. She put the chain back inside her collar. I think we are the same kind of person, Rafael Vega. They sat in Pastor Briggs' office for 40 minutes before they heard the knock. The pastor's voice, a gentle but practical. People are still here if you want to finish the meeting. Adaeze looked at Rafael. Can you finish it? Are you able? He straightened his jacket. I came here to present a proposal. Let's finish. They walked back into the fellowship hall together. The room quieted in an entirely different way than it had before. Rafael returned to the front and continued the presentation with something he had not had in the first half, which was a room that believed him. He answered every question. He did not deflect a single one. By the end of the meeting, the coalition voted to move forward with the proposal pending contract review. As people filed out, many of them stopped. An older woman took Adaze's hands in both of hers and said nothing, just held them. A young man shook Rafael's hand for a long time. When the hall was finally empty, except for the two of them in the folding chairs, Adaeze sat down on the edge of a table and looked at him. You bought 6 buildings in this neighborhood looking for me. I am trying to decide if that is the most romantic thing I have ever heard or if I should be alarmed. Rafael sat down across from her. Both are fair responses. She laughed. The laugh was the same as the one he remembered, sudden and genuine and completely unguarded. He had only heard it a few times through the fence, but he had remembered it every one of those times. She stopped laughing and looked at him seriously. Why did you never stop? Looking for you. Because you gave me something no one else gave me at the lowest point of my life, and I needed to thank you properly. That is the business reason, she said. What is the real reason? He met her eyes. Because I made you a promise, the same one I am still keeping. They did not say goodbye that night so much as they paused. Adaeze had a youth group session at 7 the next morning. Rafael had a 6:30 call with a contractor. They exchanged numbers in the parking lot of Greater Calvary Baptist Church. standing under a light that buzzed faintly in the cold. And Adaeze looked at her phone after she saved his contact and said, "I want to hear everything, all of it, every year. I want to hear what happened to you," he said. "Then let me take you to dinner." She considered him for a moment, as colleagues working on the community development project. "Of course," he said. She looked at him sideways. "You are a terrible liar for a businessman," he smiled. It was the first real smile that had lived on his face in longer than he could measure. "Good night, Adaeze. Good night, Rafael Vega." She walked to her car, an older model Honda with a dent in the rear bumper, and drove away without looking back. He stood in the parking lot until her taillights were gone. Then he took out his phone and called Carter Webb. Carter answered on the second ring, half asleep. "It's 11 at night. I found her." Silence. Then Carter said quietly, "You found her. She was there tonight. She works at the church." Carter was quiet for a moment. "Is she everything you thought she would be?" Rafael looked at the space where her car had been. "More," he said. "More than I thought anything could be." The first official dinner was at a restaurant in Midtown that Adaeze admitted afterward she had looked up online to prepare for. She had changed her outfit twice, which she told no one, and worn her mother's earrings, which she told herself was coincidence. Rafael was already at the table when she arrived. He stood when he saw her come through the door. She sat down and looked at the menu and said immediately, "This is not a business dinner." He said, "It never was." She put the menu down. "Then we should be honest with each other from the start." He said, "I would like nothing more." They talked for 4 hours. The restaurant filled and emptied around them, and they did not notice. She told him about her parents, her father's engineering firm, her mother's community organizing, Mama Ngozi, who was now 81 and still ran the church kitchen on Saturdays. She told him about her degree in social work from Georgia State, her 3 years with the county system before she came to Greater Calvary, the work with youth that she would do for free if she had to, and nearly did most months given what the nonprofit paid. He told her about the group home in Decatur, the teacher who taught him English after school 3 days a week for 2 years without being asked to, the scholarship that changed the first trajectory, the terror of starting a company with $40,000 and no safety net. She listened the way very few people listen, completely, without preparing her next sentence while he was still talking. When he described the first night he slept in a real bed after years of uncertainty, she did not say anything. She just held his gaze, and he felt, for the second time in his life, completely seen. Outside the restaurant on the sidewalk, Adaeze said, "I need you to know something." He waited. "I did not feed you because I expected anything in return." "I know," he said. "I did not do it to be thanked or remembered or found 22 years later. I know. I did it because you were hungry and I had food, and no other reason was necessary." Rafael looked at her. "I know that. That is precisely why I have never stopped thinking about you." She studied his face for a long moment in the way she had studied him through the fence at 9 years old, without fear and without pretense. Then she said, "Same time next week?" He said, "I was going to suggest Tuesday." She said, "Tuesday works." Tuesday became Thursday. Thursday became the weekend. Within 3 weeks, they had met 7 times, all framed as project meetings, none of them project meetings. Adaeze's colleague at the youth program, a woman named Portia who noticed everything, cornered her in the supply room on a Wednesday morning. "That man is not coming here 3 times a week to review zoning documents. We have reviewed every zoning document that exists. He genuinely cares about the project." Portia crossed her arms. "He looked at you for 45 straight minutes during the contractor walkthrough. They were discussing load-bearing walls. Load-bearing walls do not require that particular expression on a man's face. Adaeze arranged paper supplies that did not need arranging. We grew up connected to each other. It is complicated." Portia walked to the door. "And complicated is a word people use when they already know the answer and are afraid of it." She left. Adaeze stood in the supply room alone for a moment longer than was necessary. Rafael had begun showing up at Greater Calvary on Tuesdays, even when there was no meeting scheduled. He said he was in the neighborhood. His office was in Buckhead. She said nothing about the distance. She also noticed that he always arrived with coffee, always the same order for her. a Nigerian spiced tea from a shop 7 minutes out of his way, which meant he had asked someone what she liked and then gone and gotten it. And she found this more affecting than she was prepared to admit. One afternoon, a 17-year-old boy named Darius came to Adaze's office door with a look she recognized from 100 similar moments. And the system had told him he would age out of foster care in 60 days. He had no plan and no family, and no idea what the next 60 days were supposed to produce. She sat with him for an hour. Rafael was in the hallway waiting for their meeting and did not rush her. When Darius finally left, Adaeze came out and sat down heavily and said, "This happens every week. This exact situation, kids who are about to fall through a floor that shouldn't exist." Rafael was quiet for a moment. What would actually help them? Not a brochure. What would actually change it? She looked at him. Transitional housing they can afford on entry-level wages. Real job training, not resume workshops, actual skill development with employers who have committed to hire. Mental health support that isn't a 6-week wait list. Someone who follows them for 2 years, not 2 months. Rafael pulled out his phone and wrote all of it down. He did not tell her why. She noticed that he did not tell her why, and she noticed that she trusted him anyway. 2 weeks later, Rafael called Adaeze on a Thursday afternoon and said he wanted to show her something at his office. She came in on a Saturday morning, walked through the lobby of the Vega Capitol building in downtown Atlanta, took the elevator to the 14th floor, and walked into a conference room that had been set up with a full presentation. He was already there in a plain shirt and dark jeans, which was the most relaxed she had seen him, and he poured her the spiced tea from the corner table and said, "Sit down, I want to show you something." He pulled up the slides. The name across the first page was the Okonkwo Initiative. She looked at him. He clicked forward. Comprehensive transitional support for youth aging out of foster care, ages 16 to 24. He walked her through it. 40 units of transitional housing in 2 of his Southwest Atlanta buildings, furnished at 30% of income. A scholarship fund for education, vocational, technical, and college. Job training partnerships with 9 Atlanta companies committed to actual hiring. Mental health counseling and crisis intervention available 7 days a week. A 2-year follow-up program with dedicated caseworkers. Budget $8 million in the first year. Renewable. She stared at the screen. "Rafael, this is necessary," he said. 30 million children pass through the American foster care system. Aging out without support is the single biggest predictor of homelessness, incarceration, and poverty. You told me what was needed. I built it. She looked at the next slide. It detailed the staffing structure. Executive director, reporting to an independent board. Full operational authority. She looked up at him. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a formal offer letter. Her name was on it. Executive director. Salary significantly above what she currently earned. Full benefits. A staff of 12. A board that would not interfere with program decisions. She read it twice. Then she set it down very carefully. "Rafael, you cannot offer me a job because we are whatever this is." He met her eyes. "I am offering you this job because you are the single most qualified person in Atlanta for it. You have lived inside this system. You understand these children the way no administrator can. And the position is contractually independent of anything between us personally. Whatever happens or does not happen, the program stands." She looked at the folder again. "This is not a gesture. This is not charity. This is a real organization." "Yes," he said, "I need someone who will run it as one." She was quiet for a long time. Outside the 14th floor windows, Atlanta stretched to the horizon. She thought about Darius. She thought about the 50 other Dariuses she had watched fall through the floor in 6 years of social work. She thought about what it would mean to have the resources to actually catch them. She turned back to Rafael. "I have conditions." He said, "Name them." "Staff will be hired from communities we serve, including people who have been through the system themselves." Done. "Former foster youth will sit on the advisory board with real voting authority, not as decorative representation." "Absolutely. I keep 1 day a week at Greater Calvary with my current youth group, written into my contract, non-negotiable." He nodded. Then she said, "And the name?" She pointed at the screen. "Not the Okonkwo Initiative." He looked at her. Why not? Because this is not about me. It is about the kids. She thought for a moment. The Bible Page Initiative. He was very still. She said, because one piece of paper can change everything if it reaches the right person at the right time. That is what we are trying to do. Rafael looked at the slide for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop and changed the name. She watched the words appear on the screen. The Bible Page Initiative. Her eyes filled. She blinked it back. She stood up and extended her hand across the table. He stood and took it. She said, let's go change some lives. He said, we already have. She held his gaze across the handshake. Then she pulled her hand back and sat down and said, now, tell me everything about the funding structure, because if the board has override authority on program decisions, we have a problem. He sat back down and smiled and said, I was waiting for that. They spent the next 3 hours going through every clause. It was the best meeting of his professional life. Adaeze gave her notice at the county the following Monday. Her co-workers cried. Her supervisor held her hand and said, you were always meant for something bigger. Go build it. She cried in the parking lot before driving back to Greater Calvary, and Mama Ngozi, who had come to the church that afternoon to cook for the Saturday food pantry prep, found her sitting in the fellowship hall in the quiet. Mama Ngozi sat down beside her without asking questions and without filling the silence. After a long moment, Adaeze said, I think I am falling in love with him, Mama. The older woman looked at the wall in front of her with the expression of someone who has known this for longer than she is being credited for. That boy from the fence, she said. Yes, Adaeze said. Mama Ngozi nodded slowly. Good, she said. It is about time. You have been carrying that note he gave you since you were 9 years old. He has been carrying your Bible page since he was 10. Two people do not carry each other's words for 22 years as strangers. Adaeze looked at her grandmother. He has not said anything. He is a man, a mama. He is afraid. They are all afraid. You will have to be the brave one. She patted Adaeze's knee and stood up. Now come help me with the rice. The Bible Page Initiative opened its doors on a Tuesday in early spring. The first cohort was 30 youth, ages 16 to 22, all either currently in the system or within 60 days of aging out. Darius was among them. Adaeze met with each one personally in the first week, not to intake forms and case numbers, but just to talk. She sat across from each of them and asked 2 questions. What do you want your life to look like in 5 years? And what is the one thing standing between you and that? She wrote their answers by hand in a notebook. She carried the notebook everywhere. Within the first month, all 30 youth were stably housed in the transitional units. 22 were enrolled in education or training programs. 14 had part-time employment with partner companies. Darius enrolled in an electrician certification program. He called Adaeze 3 weeks in. Miss Okonkwo. They let me wire an actual panel today. I didn't ruin it. He sounded genuinely astonished. She said, Darius, you were never going to ruin it. You just needed someone to let you try. A girl named Simone, 18, had been couch surfing for 4 months after her 3rd placement fell through. She moved into a transitional unit and cried the first night because she had her own room with a door that locked, and she had not had that in 2 years. She enrolled in a medical assistant program. She told Adaeze, I want to take care of people because I know what it feels like when no one does. A boy named Jerome, 17, who had not spoken in his intake meeting, 3 weeks later raised his hand during a group session and asked a question. Everyone in the room recognized what that cost him. Adaeze looked at him and said, that is an excellent question, Jerome. He did not say anything, but he came back the next week. Rafael visited the program twice a week. He attended group sessions without making himself the center of them. He sat in the back and listened. Sometimes he spoke, not as the founder, but as someone who had been where these kids were, and the room changed when he did that. The air in it, the faces. One evening, a group of youth were having dinner in the common space of the transitional building, and Rafael sat down at the end of the table uninvited, and someone passed him the bread, and someone else asked him how he had started his company, and he told them the real version. The $40,000, the fear, the years before it worked, and the table was completely quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something true is being said. Adaeze stood in the doorway and watched, and she felt something shift in her chest that had been working its way loose for months. 3 months into the program, on a Friday evening after a long week, Rafael and Adaeze were the last two in the office. She was going through files he was supposed to have left an hour ago. She looked up and said, "Rafael, you do not have to stay." He said, "I know." She looked at him for a moment. He was sitting on the couch across the room with a program report in his lap, reading it with an expression of total concentration. And he looked more at peace in this non-profit office than he had ever looked in any of his own buildings, and she understood something clearly that she had been circling for weeks. She said his name again, softer. He looked up. She said, "I need to tell you something." He waited. "I kept that note you gave me through the fence for 22 years. Not as a memory. I kept it the way you keep something that matters to you, the way you kept the Bible page." He set the report down. She said, "I have been pretending for 3 months that what I feel for you is professional, that it is gratitude for the program and the resources and what you are building here." He said nothing. She said, It is not only that." He stood up. "I know," he said. He crossed the room and stood in front of her. "I did not want to say it first because I did not want you to feel obligated." She looked at him. "I am not a woman who does things out of obligation, Rafael Vega." "I know that too," he said. "Good," she said. Then he kissed her. It was quiet and deliberate, the kind of kiss that has been decided on long before it happens. And when they stepped back from each other, she looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment because nothing they could have said would have been adequate. Then she said, "I should have done that in the parking lot of Greater Calvary 2 months ago." He said, "I should have done it at the restaurant in Midtown." She said, "We were both too careful." He said, "Yes." She said, "Let's not be careful anymore." He said, "Agreed." Outside the office windows, Atlanta was beginning its evening, lights coming on across the skyline, the city doing what cities do without knowing what was just decided inside one 14th floor window. She reached up and put her hand against his face briefly, and then stepped back and said, "Take me to dinner." He said, "Right now?" She said, "Right now." He got his coat. 6 months after the program opened, the numbers told part of the story. The Bible Page Initiative had served 112 youth. 87% were still engaged with the program at the 6-month mark, against a national average of 38. 71 were in education or job training. 54 were in stable housing. 0 had returned to homelessness. But the numbers were not the story. Darius was the story. He completed his electrician certification, was hired at a union rate by one of the partner companies, and moved out of the transitional unit into his own apartment. He called Adaeze on the day he got his first full paycheck, and she could hear in his voice that he was standing very straight. He said, "I want to do something." "What?" He said, "I want to help run the group sessions for the new cohort. I want to be the person who was there for someone the way you were there for me." She said, "Darius, that is the whole point. Come in Monday." Simone passed her medical assistant certification on the first attempt. She sent Adaeze a photo from the testing center, grinning. She had not grinned in her intake photo. Jerome asked 4 months into the program if he could speak at the first community showcase evening. And he stood in front of an audience of 80 people and talked for 6 minutes without stopping. When he sat down, Adaeze had to look at the ceiling for a moment. The media found the program. A journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wrote a feature. The headline was, "From the Fence to the Foundation." NBC Atlanta followed with a segment, then CNN. The story of Rafael and Adaeze, the fence and the Bible page in the 22 years, moved through social media with a speed that neither of them had anticipated. People tore Bible pages and left them folded in public spaces with notes written to strangers. The hashtag was simple, the Bible page. It trended nationally for 4 days. Churches adopted it as an outreach concept. A pastor in Birmingham launched a version within 2 months. Indianapolis followed. By the end of that year, 11 cities had contacted Adaeze about replicating the model. She flew to 4 of them herself. Mama Ngozi watched the CNN segment on the television in the kitchen at Greater Calvary and said nothing except, "Good." Then she went back to the rice. The 6-month celebration gala was held at a downtown Atlanta venue. 400 people, donors and partners, and program participants and community leaders. Adaeze stood backstage before they went on and looked at her hands. Rafael found her there. He looked at her for a moment. "You are extraordinary," he said. She said, "I am nervous. You have testified before a state housing committee. You have been on CNN twice." "I know," she said. "This is different. This is our people." He took her hand. She held his. They walked out together. He spoke first about the program, the numbers, the cities, the future. Then he stopped. "There is one thing left to say." He turned to face Adaeze. The room was already very quiet. This program exists because of what this woman did when she was 9 years old. She did not give me food because she expected anything. She gave it because she saw me as a person when no one else did. He reached into his jacket pocket. Adaeze's breath left her body. He went down on one knee. The room inhaled. 400 people held completely still. He held up a ring. The center stone was not a diamond. It was a deep, warm amber, the color of the afternoon light that had come through the church fence on the first day she had ever seen him. "Adaeze Okonkwo, 22 years ago I made you a promise. I told you I would come back." He looked up at her. "I want to make you another one. Will you marry me?" Adaeze stood in the lights in front of 400 people and did not say anything for 3 full seconds. Then she said yes. She laughed through the word. "Of course, yes." He stood. The room erupted. She took his face in her hands the way she had on the night in the office. But this time she did not step back. They were still standing there, foreheads together, when the applause finally began to settle, and neither of them cared about the noise or the cameras or the 400 people witnessing it. They were in the parking lot of a church on a cold night in Atlanta. They were on either side of a chain-link fence with a piece of paper between them. They were in every moment in between, and they were here. They were married on a Saturday in October, 8 months after the gala. Now, the ceremony was held at Greater Calvary Baptist Church, not in the sanctuary, outside at the south fence. Adaeze had asked Pastor Briggs if they could use the space, and he had said, "I cannot imagine a better use of it in the history of this property." The fence had been repaired and painted and woven through with greenery and small white flowers. A plaque had been installed on the nearest post 2 weeks prior. It read, "On this ground, in February, an act of kindness changed 2 lives. What grew from here changed thousands more." 130 guests sat in chairs on the grass on both sides of the fence. Rafael stood at the altar, which was simply a table covered in white cloth with candles and a Bible open to Psalm 34. Mama Ngozi sat in the front row in a deep green wrapper and did not cry, which surprised everyone who knew her, until the moment Adaeze appeared at the far end of the outdoor aisle, and then Mama Ngozi cried immediately and did not stop. Adaeze walked toward Rafael with her father on one side and her mother on the other, and she had chosen a simple ivory dress and her mother's earrings, and she had not been able to stop smiling since she woke up. Rafael watched her come toward him, and his face did a thing that men at their own weddings sometimes cannot prevent, which is that he cried before she was even halfway down the aisle. And Carter Webb, standing next to him as his best man, put a hand on his shoulder and said nothing, because nothing was needed. They exchanged their vows at the fence. Adaeze spoke first. "Rafael, when I was 9 years old, I saw you through this fence, and I made a choice. It was not a complicated choice. It was simply the choice to see you. I want to spend the rest of my life making that same choice, every day, to see you completely." He swallowed hard. She continued, "You have given so much back to so many people because of one morning at this fence. I want you to know that what you built from who you already were. The boy who wrote me a thank you note in broken English and kept my Bible page for 22 years, that is who built all of it, and that is who I am marrying today." Rafael could not speak for a moment. Then he found his voice. "Adaeze, I have held your Bible page for 22 years because it was the proof that I was worth seeing. You were 9 years old and you saw me." He held her gaze. "You gave me the verse that says, 'God has not forgotten the brokenhearted.' I want you to know that I am standing here today as proof that the verse is true. And I want to spend every day for the rest of my life being proof that you were right to see me." He reached into his pocket and produced a length of ribbon, pale gold, and tied one half around her wrist and kept the other in his hand. "Something to carry," he said. "That is ours." She laughed and wiped her eyes and said, Pastor Briggs, please finish this before we are both completely undone. Laughter moved through the chairs. Pastor Leonard Briggs said with considerable joy, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The 130 guests stood. Darius, sitting in the third row with Jerome and Simone, started the applause. Rafael kissed his wife at the fence where it had all begun. When the afternoon light came through the chain link in long slanted bars, the same color as it had been on a February morning 22 years ago. And every person in the yard felt, in whatever way people feel things they cannot fully articulate, that they were witnessing the completion of something that had been in motion for a very long time. At the reception, held in the renovated Greater Calvary Fellowship Hall, Darius gave the toast. He stood at the microphone in a suit he had bought with his first union paycheck and looked at the room and said, I am going to keep this short because I am not someone who has a lot of practice with speeches. What I want to say is this. When I came to this program, I did not believe that anyone was going to show up for me. I had been told my whole life, in one way or another, that I was not worth the trouble. He paused. Miss Okonkwo showed up anyway. Mr. Vega showed up anyway. And they did not do it because of what they expected to get back. They did it because that is who they are. He lifted his glass. To two people who prove that kindness is not a feeling, it is a decision. He sat down. The room was very quiet for a moment before the applause came. Adaeze pressed her hand to her mouth. Rafael put his arm around her. Late in the evening, when the guests were beginning to leave, and the hall was warm with candlelight and the particular fullness of a good day ending well, Rafael and Adaeze stepped outside alone. The October air was cool. The fence was still threaded with flowers. They stood beside it, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the plaque. Adaeze said, Do you remember what you thought when I gave you that page? He thought about it. I thought, why is she doing this? What does she want? She looked at him. What did you decide? He said, I decided you were doing it for no reason except that it was right. She nodded. I was 9. I did not have a strategy. He said, I know. That is what made it matter. She leaned her head against his shoulder. A sound came from around the corner of the building, small and uncertain. They both turned. A girl appeared. She was perhaps 10 years old, thin, wearing a jacket that was not warm enough for October, holding herself in the way children hold themselves when they are not sure if they are allowed to be where they are. She stopped when she saw them. They looked at each other. Adaeze took one step toward the girl and crouched down to her level. Hey, what's your name? The girl said very quietly. Patience. Are you hungry, Patience? A small nod. Adaeze straightened up and took Rafael's hand. Let's go get you something to eat. They brought Patience inside. They sat with her at a table while she ate. She ate the way Rafael had eaten through the fence, carefully at first, then not carefully at all. When she was finished, she looked at them. Why are you being nice to me? Adaeze looked at Rafael. He reached into the breast pocket of his wedding jacket and took out a small folded square. He had carried a copy of the page every day since he was 10 years old. He handed it to Patience. She unfolded it and looked at the psalm. He said, Someone gave me that when I was hungry and nobody else was paying attention. He put his finger on the circled verse. That means God has not forgotten you, even when it feels like everyone has. Patience looked at the page. She held it carefully, the way you hold something you recognize as important, even if you are not entirely sure why. She folded it back into quarters and put it in her pocket. Thank you, she said. Adaeze got her connected to a social worker before the night was over. Before Patience left, she turned back once at the door and waved. They waved back. The door closed. Adaeze looked at Rafael. He looked at Adaeze. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. The page was still moving. It had never stopped. The Bible Page Initiative has provided stable housing, education, and employment support to over 900 youth across Atlanta and 11 partner cities. The program maintains an 89% retention rate, more than double the national average. Darius is now the program's Assistant Director of Youth Engagement. Simone is a licensed medical assistant and volunteers with the program's health navigation team. Jerome is enrolled in his second year of college and is studying social work. Adaeze and Rafael Vega are expecting their first child. They have already agreed on a name. Her name will be Patience.